Das Ruhrgebiet. uh, we went up to the north and did a kind of a circling thing. We went up. Well, I just can't. I just. It was a diversion because more help was needed. By the way, that's when we were up there on that swing up to the north to help relieve those concentration camps and to take supplies up there to them. We were involved in that for about 3 weeks. That's when Roosevelt died, and that was in, I guess, March, something like March of 1945. And of course the war was not over until May 5th. So, but we helped relieve and liberate one camp in what they call the Ruhrgebiet. You know, the Ruhr is where the heavy industry is located. To this very day, that's where a good portion of the German industry is located. Heavy industry, metal industries, and machinery, and chemicals, and so, and we also helped liberate, not in the infantry had already liberated, but to get things organized and get the prisoners clothed and get some food into them. That's part of what we did. Either that or we did traffic assignments. We took traffic assignments to go in and see that those things were done. So that's why they used us to help organize the relief effort. The second one that we did was, besides the one in the Ruhrgebiet, was near Munich. It's just about 5 miles northwest of Munich, Dachau. You've probably seen that in the news. It was one of the most notorious, and it was, I think somewhere in our pictures we may have some pictures, black and white pictures I took of the about, I would say 100 or 150 of the inmates were coming out of some of those. This was the day that they were finally liberated, and I took pictures, and some of them had very little clothing on, some of them had ragged clothing on, and some of them could hardly walk. Some of them had to be helped to walk. So these were the ones that couldn't operate on their own. You know, they had to have help. And there were the ones that I saw, about 100 to 150, and that was only from one set of barracks there. And at the rail track, it was the only rail. It was kind of a rail spur that came up into camp to unload supplies and reload whatever they had to send back or out. And in those rail cars, there were about, as I recall, about half a dozen of them. They were, you know, coal cars, big tanks, kind of like tanks with no tops on them. And they were filled with corpses. Germans, I mean not Germans, Russians, Americans, British, all nationalities. Inmates who hadn't been killed, they had just starved to death and been loaded in there, and they hadn't been able to get them out of there as they wanted to do, to remove the evidence of their huge transgression, you know, and having those camps in the first place. So that was a sight. The odor was not that bad because they had been prepared. They'd been, I suppose, all sprayed down and all. And but to see that many dead and like cattle, you know, just thrown into cars. And I don't know. even have a thought of going to count them, but there were about, as I recall, about half a dozen rail cars. I wish I had taken pictures of that, but I didn't want to get too many pictures. They'd think, that I was taking advantage of a situation, which I didn't want to do. But I took 2 or 3 pictures of them coming out of the barracks, and kind of like feeling their way, like some of them looked like they couldn't survive. Even though they'd been rescued, they couldn't survive because they looked so dreadful. They looked like walking skeletons,
Was this your impression that, and I don't know much about Dachau as far as what, certainly in 1945, at the end of the war, what the makeup of their prisoners was?
It varied from camp to camp.
Right.
Yeah, I made inquiries, and some of them had lots of Slavic soldiers in, like Russian and Ukrainian, and let's see, what else did they have? Oh, some of them also had captives from some of the Balkan states, like Romanians, for example, and some of them had Finnish soldiers. Some of them had, let's see, what did we find up in the...
Mostly war prisoners?
Yeah.
Soldiers?
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
At this point?
Yes, In fact, I don't think any of those that we helped treat and move out were no, well, see, these were, the ones that we had to do with were not work camps. They were just prisoner camps, and they were all either formerly in some other army, or they were Germans who had opposed Hitler or deserted or whatever they'd done and got caught. So they were Germans and French, from everywhere, really. And that's what most Americans, I think, didn't really understand, that during that time in 1945, that really those camps were a repository for dozens of different nationalities, and you never knew from one camp to another what the composition would be, because we didn't have the inside information yet, on that the Germans, in their meticulous record keeping.
You mean they didn't just hand you over a folder as you entered town?
They didn't. They weren't interested in letting us know anything about these semi-secret. It was always semi-secret operations, because they knew that it was against international law, and they knew that if we that some of them were going to be executed by the Allied forces once we got all the details in our possession. Yeah, that's what happened. And that's why those trials at Nuremberg had to take place, and that's why somebody had to be punished, symbolic punishment, for the whole country. And lots of Germans, gee whiz, I've read some of the statistics on how many Germans were in concentration camps, and I've forgotten pretty much what they were, but probably a 500,000 people, Germans, were in concentration camps for various reasons. Lots of them tried to get out before war started, or during the war, captured, put in a concentration camp. And some of them became laborers in these productive concentration camps. But see, none of those that we liberated were that kind. They were always in camps because they had been military personnel, or captured and sent there but not used as labor. Because using them as labor, that meant you had to feed them or just to keep them going. So what they did is warehouse the others, the captives from the armed forces of other countries. They just starved them slowly, and it took less care and less food. So there was method in their madness all the way through. became a kind of I don't know. When criminals get charge and power, charge of a country and power in a country like that, all hell breaks loose. You know what I mean? And you see that happening in countries all over the world right now. How many dictators are there? You know, dozens, dozens, and all these terrible things happening all over again. That's why I think eventually there has to be some kind of an international, system worked out. The United Nations may not be the one, but that kind of a system, I think, eventually is the only thing that can prevent another world war, or help prevent another world war. Huh. Terrible experiences.